Welcome to Boundary Training at First United Church of Oak Park. Today we're going to talk about the most important thing that we can provide to minors in our care: physical, emotional, and spiritual safety. Thank you for answering the call to do this work at First United. You may be wondering why we do boundary training. First, we have an ethical obligation. We also have a religious imperative to protect the vulnerable, and that includes children and youth. We'll talk more about that later. And we are legally responsible for the children in our care. We'll talk a little about that later too. The other reason is it has happened here and it can happen anywhere. It's important that we recognize the potential harm, and we'll have you do boundary training every year that you work with minors. We'll just give you a refresher, and this gets everyone on the same page and ensures that we are all in agreement about how we are going to protect the children and youth of First United. This year, we are going to be looking at our new Safe Church policy, which is very exciting to have an expanded and thorough policy for how we will protect children and youth. So think for a moment about all the boundaries that you've observed at First United. What comes to mind? I can think of all kinds of boundaries at First United. There are boundaries of time. We agree that church school will begin at 9:45 and end at 10:45. We agree that worship will start at 11 and last about an hour. Those are boundaries of time, and they help us plan our day. We have space boundaries. There are rooms with walls and doors, and this ensures that we have particular places where we can do particular things. So we have not only set boundaries around a room like the sanctuary, but we also have boundaries around what we will do in the sanctuary. We have boundaries in our relationships. We agree that we will, treat each other with respect. So there are all kinds of boundaries. So these boundaries, are they a gift? Why or why not? It's important to note that you probably will have some ambivalence. Some boundaries will feel like a gift, and some will feel like a chore. Some boundaries feel like, oh, I'm so glad to know that this is an hour. I know when it starts and I know when it ends. Or I'm so glad that we have this room in which we can learn, in which we can worship. Some boundaries may feel difficult, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. I love this quote: "You can put the dog out and tie him up, or build a fence and let him run." This is an illustration of how boundaries can be a gift. In order to keep a dog safe, you've got options. You can tie the dog up, but then the dog does not have any freedom. Or you can build boundaries around the dog, within which the dog can run and be free and play. And that is what we want. We want to create a safe container in which children and youth at First United can run and play and grow and be safe and rest assured that we are going to take care of them. So what does our faith call us to do when it comes to protecting minors? Here are a few scriptures. Micah 6:8, "God has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." So doing justice is about protecting the vulnerable, and walking humbly is about not misusing our power. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow." So you see a listing of vulnerable people and a mandate to take care of vulnerable people, to rescue, defend, and plead for them. And then Matthew 18:5 and 6, where Jesus does not mince words. "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." So Jesus is serious about us not hurting children. It would be better for us to be thrown into the sea than for us to hurt these little ones. And so we are working hard to protect the children and youth in our care. There are some myths about abuse, and I want to share those with you. This is the part of the boundary training where we deal with some difficult topics. And so I want you to make your first priority taking care of yourself, whatever that means for you. If you need to pause the video, take a deep breath, do the things that help you calm down, please do that. Please take care of yourself. Some of the things that we will talk about may trigger emotions or memories for you that are painful. And if you need to talk about those things, know that I am available. Please let me know. So here are some of the myths about abuse. It's only abuse if it's violent. There are all kinds of abuse. There's emotional abuse. There's verbal abuse. Not all abuse is physically violent. Only bad people abuse children. This goes to the belief that I would know, I would be able to pick out someone who is abusing children. And the truth is, we can't pick out those folks. There are a lot of reasons for that. One is that a typical part of a pattern of abuse is grooming your character witnesses. So often someone who is hurting a child at home, perhaps in public, is going to put on a really good public face so that people will think, oh, they would never hurt a child. That's so out of character. So they're creating character witnesses, and that is often a part of the pathology. Child abuse doesn't happen in good families. Child abuse happens in families that look all kinds of different ways. Child abuse happens in families where you would never suspect. Most abusers are strangers. This is just the opposite is true. Most abusers are trusted adults in the child's life. The dad, the mom, the uncle, aunt, scout leader, Sunday school teacher. It's those trusted adults. Because access to the child and trust from the other adults in the child's life are key components. Abused children always grow up to be abusers. This is not true. While there are contributing factors and we might see someone who has grown up to abuse and recognize that they had abuse in their past, that doesn't mean that all people who experience abuse go on to abuse others. And abuse can't happen here. Abuse can happen anywhere. And it has happened in all kinds of different places. And so it's just important to remember that we are not immune, that just because you think, oh, they're such a good person, it doesn't mean that that they are not capable. And so this is also a part of believing people when they come forward and say that someone has hurt them. If we believe these myths, it's very hard for us to support those who have been victims of abuse. Let's think more about the myth that it can't happen here. So, has First United ever, or does it now, or could it ever fall into any of these categories of the church at risk? Trust leaders implicitly, lack of adequate screening and training, frequent close contact between adults and children and youth. I hope that you recognize that, yes, some of these things we actually want. We want you as church school leaders and youth advisors to have frequent close contact with the children and youth. That's an important piece of their growth. And it also puts us at risk. It is both a risk factor and it is a resource to us. Trusting leaders. We want the children and youth to trust you. We want them to trust that you are going to care for, love them, and help them grow with fun and engaging activities. And that is both a risk factor and a resource to us. We can control lack of adequate screening and training. We can provide you with screening and training, which we do. So what we want to do is reduce our risk the best that we can while maintaining trust and interaction between adults and minors. So let's think for a moment about the power that we have as church school leaders and youth advisors. Let's talk about power and vulnerability. What does that even mean? So in this situation with these cats here, who has the right of way? It's the cats who are pedestrians. And who is vulnerable? The pedestrians are vulnerable. So who's at risk to do harm? The cat who's driving. The cats who are pedestrians have the right of way because they are vulnerable, because they do not have the same protections that the cat who is driving has. Also, I would not trust that cat. That cat seems very at risk to do harm. So, the driver is at risk to do harm because the driver has power. What is power? It's greater resources. The cat who's driving has a motor that allows him to go fast, a steering wheel so that he can turn quickly. That cat has a lot of steel around him, protecting him in the case of a crash. There are safety measures built into that car. So these are a lot of resources that the driver has. When we have greater resources, we have the potential for abusing those with less power. So we have a responsibility to use that power for the benefit of those who are vulnerable, which means that vulnerability is just having fewer resources. And then because you have fewer resources, you have the potential for being abused by those with more power. And so you should have the expectation of protection. So in cases when we are the ones who have greater resources, greater power, and when we are leading children and youth, that is the case, then we have a responsibility. I like to use the rules of the sea to help us think about this because it turns our understanding a little bit upside down for a minute, and that helps our brains process it. We're going to use words in ways that we don't usually use them, and we will go back to using them differently in our daily life as soon as this is over, but this will help, I promise. So I don't know if any of you are into boating, but in the rules of the sea, the language that they use is that the speedboat, the boat with the motor, the boat under power, is the burdened party. The speedboat has power and control of movement, and so it is burdened with the obligation to avoid boats under sail. Since the boats under sail can't turn as quickly, the speedboat needs to do the turning to make sure that they avoid the sailboat. They have the burden of responsibility. This is not often how we think about burden. Sailboats. Sailboats in the rules of the sea are labeled the privileged party. Sailboats are at the mercy of the wind. They have less control over their movement, and they are vulnerable to boats with motors. So, in the rules of the sea, the sailboat has the privilege of being protected. We do not often talk about privilege as the time when we have fewer resources. But in this case, thinking about that can help us think about our responsibility. As the adult with power in the room, we have the burden to protect, and the children have the privilege of being protected. And that's how it should be. Now, of course, we need to have our conversations about white privilege, about male privilege, all of those kinds of privilege that we talk about. And we will go back to that immediately after this slide, of course. But for a moment, think about how beautiful it would be if those with fewer resources were the privileged ones, the ones who were taken care of and supported. So power and vulnerability is relational, and it is contextual. So my power will change from setting to setting. When I stand in the pulpit, I have a microphone. That gives me power. I have the resource of being able to say things to those in the pews. I have my title of pastor. I have all of these resources that give me a certain amount of power in that context. If after church I go to the dentist, I am very vulnerable. I don't know anything about dentistry. The other person in the room has all of the knowledge. They also have sharp tools that could hurt me, and I'm in a vulnerable position laying on my back with my mouth open. So I am very vulnerable. I'm the same person in the pulpit as I am in the dentist chair, but I have a very different relationship to power and vulnerability depending on where I am. So, what attributes of power might you have in the classroom or the youth group? You might have power or vulnerability in any of these areas: race, gender, sexual orientation, economic class, physical size, physical health and ability. I'm going to hold off on age for a second. Mental health. There are others. In our context, you have age. You will always have age in our context. That is an attribute of power that will be unchanging because we are talking about working with minors. You may think to yourself, I don't want power. I completely relate to that statement. And so it's important that we remember power is just having more resources in the moment. In this context, having more resources. That's all power is. It's a resource. Think of it like fire. If I have fire, I could use it to your benefit. I could cook you a meal with it, and we could sit down and enjoy that meal, and it could nourish you. I could also use that fire to burn down your house. That is a very different scenario. I have greatly harmed you. But what I had was the same. I had fire. I could help you or hurt you with that fire. Your power in the classroom is the same. It is absolutely neutral that you have that power of being the adult of having the role of teacher or advisor, of if you're a youth leader being older than the students in the class. That is a neutral thing. What matters is how you use it. Will you use that to protect and love and help those students grow? So power is morally neutral. All persons have vulnerabilities and attributes of power and privilege, and these change with context. But children have less power and more vulnerabilities than adults. This is unchanging. Adults have the responsibility or the burden to use their power to care for and protect minors. So here are a few scenarios. A child or a teen motions for you to come and talk to them in the stairwell. Are you vulnerable in that moment, or are you at risk to do harm? Remember that power and vulnerability are all about resources. So in this moment, what resources do you have? You have all the resources you could need. You have the ability to say, hey, let's go talk somewhere else. Or hey, let me grab someone else and we'll come talk to you together. You have plenty of resources, but you are at risk to do harm. You could go into that stairwell, which is a place where it is secluded, and you could hurt that child. Second scenario, another teacher threatens that if you tell anyone he asked to give a child a back rub, you'll be in trouble. Now, inevitably, when we talk about this particular little case study, someone talks about, what if that teacher has more power than I do? What if I'm vulnerable to that teacher? And that very well could be the case. That teacher could be physically stronger than you, could be of a different race than you are, could be older than you, could be all kinds of things that would cause you to be vulnerable to that person. But who is the most vulnerable person in this scenario? Who has the fewest resources? It's the child. You are at risk to harm that child if you do not speak on their behalf. If you do not, in this situation, what would be the right thing to do? Report this to me, or to Alicia if you're in a youth group and this is another youth advisor. If you don't, that child is at risk of that behavior continuing and even escalating. So you are in that situation at risk to do harm to that child by not reporting it. And yes, perhaps you are in some ways vulnerable to that other adult, but if you were to come to me and tell me about this situation, we would find the resources to make sure that that we did everything we could for that teacher to not take advantage of your vulnerabilities. A child is alone in the bathroom and calls for you. Are you vulnerable, or are you at risk to do harm? You are at risk to do harm because you have resources. You could call back and say, how can I help you? What do you need? And then you could figure out a way to handle that. You're at risk to do harm because you could go into the bathroom where that child is in a secluded place in a vulnerable position and hurt them. But you don't have to. So you're not vulnerable. You're at risk to do harm. And in that situation, the right thing to do would be to say, let me grab someone else and we will come and help you. Or to say, what can I do for you? And see if you can help from outside the bathroom. A teen who is physically stronger than you makes a sexually explicit comment about you. Are you vulnerable, or are you at risk to do harm? A couple of things that often trip folks up here. What's happened is a sexually explicit comment. Remember that power and vulnerability is situational and contextual. So in this situation, even though this teen is physically stronger than you, they have not physically overpowered you. They have made a comment about you. And in common usage, we might say, I feel vulnerable when someone makes a sexually explicit comment about me. And that is a common usage that is fine. I feel vulnerable. But what I want you to understand here is that your actual vulnerability has to do with your resources. You have resources. You are the adult in the situation, and you have other adults in the situation. You can call for backup if you needed to, but also you have the resource of your authority to say, that's not an appropriate comment for this time, and I can't let you talk to me like that. You have resources. You have ways of handling this. So you are at risk to do harm because what's the risk? You say, oh, this person is into me. I'm flattered. I will go along with this. And you have the potential for hurting that teen. But you also have the potential for setting a boundary with that teen that is healthy for them. A teen only lives a few blocks away and asks for a ride home from youth group. Are you vulnerable, or are you at risk to do harm? You are at risk to do harm. You're not vulnerable. Unfortunately, the right thing to do in this situation is the inconvenient thing to do. You're going to have to find another way, because our policy and best practice is to not be alone one-on-one in a car with a minor. So you would need someone else in the car with you. If you had written permission from the parent to have this kid in your car, you would need another person with you anyway. Chances are you don't have written permission to have this teen in the car with you, which in our policy, if you're going to have a teen get in a car from a First United event, you have to have that written permission. So you get to wait for the person who's supposed to pick this kid up. It is inconvenient, and it is a protective factor for our teens that we don't allow them to be one-on-one in a car with an adult. Okay, we have a brand new Safe Church policy, and within that policy we have our guidelines for working with minors. We have training and screening, we have reporting procedures, and we have a response plan. There's a lot more in there than just these 4 bullet points, but I want to point these out to you. The guidelines are very important, and I anticipate that you will read those yourself. I will not be reading all of the guidelines aloud to you. You can thank me for that. But I will work through some highlights and make sure that you have read the policy. This is your training, and we also do background checks. We have reporting procedures should there be a boundary violation or should a child disclose to you abuse. And then we have a response plan, and the staff is responsible for that. So instead of reading all of the Safe Church policy to you, I want to help you look through it. So first turn to section 9. This is where the guidelines are. And I encourage you to just pause the video for a moment and look it over. Okay, now that you have looked over the Safe Church policy guidelines, which is section 9, let's look at these questions. You'll find the answers, I promise, in your Safe Church policy. Can Barb and her wife teach a church school class together? The correct answer is no, and the reason is because 2 non-related adults must be present. 2 non-related adults. So spouses cannot, There are legal reasons for that. Spouses are not obligated to testify against one another in court. And so if something happens and a spouse covers for the other spouse, they do not have to testify. We also just want to avoid someone covering for a relative. So, a sibling pair couldn't teach, a parent-child couldn't teach unless there was another unrelated adult. What special precaution do I take if the door of my classroom has no windows? You should have found in your Safe Church policy that if the door has no windows, as a precaution, you will prop the door open. We're doing everything that we possibly can for transparency and accountability. So when that door is open, people walk by, you'll be seen. That's what we're working for. Where should I be while a child is using the restroom? Anywhere but alone in the restroom with that child is an acceptable answer. You should be anywhere but alone in a restroom with a minor. So you can be just outside the door. You can have another adult with you if you are taking your class for a bathroom break altogether. But you shouldn't be in the bathroom with just the kids or just the youth. The question came up, if I'm in the bathroom and a child walks in, what do I do? You finish up and get out of there as soon as you can. Our primary goal is the safety of the children, and our secondary goal is to make sure that we are not putting ourselves in situations where we could be accused of hurting a child when we didn't. This is less of a concern than keeping the kids safe, obviously. But if you find yourself alone in the restroom, just think to yourself, oh, I'm going to get out of here as quick as I can. Okay, a teenager just left in the middle of youth group. What do I do? They just up and left. You're going to contact the guardian of that teen and let them know your child left. They are no longer in our care. And let the parent or guardian take it from there. Obviously, you're going to try to prevent that from happening. But it has happened that a teenager has decided they're just going to head home or whatever they're going to do. A minor wants to talk to you one-on-one. Where should you talk? You should find a space that is visible to others. So let's go sit on the couches in the lounge and chat. That's a great place. We can sit on the benches in the on the labyrinth. That's perfect. After church, we can sit in the sanctuary. That's also great. All of those are places where if a child wants to talk to you about something that is, weighing on them, they're not going to be so public that others are eavesdropping, but they are going to also not be in such a private place that we're violating that piece of our Safe Church policy, that we're not going to have adults and children one-on-one. You're about to divide up into advisor cars and head to the bowling alley. Greg showed up late with a friend you've never met. Is it okay for his friend to come along? So, in your Safe Church policy, you should have seen that we have to have written permission to take minors off of church premises during church events. So if you've never met this friend, you don't have written permission from their parent or guardian. So you won't be able to take them to the bowling alley unless you can get written permission. You can say, you know, okay, Greg, we've got a minute here. Let's call your parent and see if they can sign this and scan it and return it to me, if you've got time for that. But you do need written permission. The same is true for church school. If you're gonna, walk your class to the park one Sunday, you're gonna need to have written permission. There is a permission slip included in the Safe Church policy. There's only one bathroom at the retreat center where we're having a retreat. When should you use the bathroom? So in your policy, it says that if there are not separate youth advisor bathrooms, then there will be separate times for youth and advisors to use the bathroom. And Alicia will handle that and make sure that you have a time when you will be able to use the bathroom with just adults. So obviously those weren't all of the guidelines. And so make sure that you have looked through all of those. Those were general guidelines. We're going to talk more specifically about social media guidelines now. So adults should not submit friend or follow requests to minors. So you shouldn't be going on Instagram and following the teens of First United. Again, this is about power and vulnerability. They may feel like they are obligated to respond to your request. And what we want to do is to give them the option of initiating that if they want to. This is the same way we deal with physical contact. So we don't go up and give a child a hug. But if they ask for a hug, then we can give them one. So we're letting the vulnerable party have the power in the situation to initiate. If an authorized youth worker chooses to accept friend requests from minors, so a youth has followed you on Instagram, it is okay for you to accept that follow request or that friend request on Facebook or whatever you're working with. But you then assume responsibility for maintaining the appropriateness of your profile. And you must be willing to share all of your posts and correspondence with the pastoral staff if requested. So if a youth comes and says, hey, this youth advisor is doing something really inappropriate, or having this really inappropriate conversation with me on social media, then you need to be ready to show those materials and say, this is what I actually said, this is what happened, so that we can work to protect that child or clear up that issue. So retain all correspondence so that it can be retrieved. Don't have any correspondence that will disappear. So platforms where messages disappear after they're sent or received, that's not the place you want to be corresponding with the youth. Use public platforms when you communicate with minors. So think about this as like, meeting in the lounge versus meeting behind a closed door in an isolated room, right? You want to try for a public platform, like, commenting on their post, great. Direct messaging, less great. If you are in a private message, a direct message, try to include someone else in the conversation. So one-on-one communication is like being one-on-one in public. You want to avoid that. And so there are different ways that you can do that. I've had, teenagers say, hey, I have this thing going on and I really need to talk. And my response is, I'm so glad you came to me. Who else can we bring in on this? I want you to have as much support as possible. And so we bring in another youth advisor. We bring in, someone that they trust. The other option is, do you want to talk about this in the lounge after church on Sunday or something? And often they don't. They want to talk. They want to, type it out, and that's fine. But just, get all the support you can get in there. Now, let's say a teenager texts you, what time's the cookout? You do not need to say, hey, I'm so glad you asked. Who else can we bring in on this conversation? No, you can say 5. Just text back 5 o'clock. It's okay. What we want to do is avoid getting into those, long, in-depth, personal, easily misconstrued messages with teenagers by ourselves with no one witnessing. So whether that's in person or online. Okay, let's talk for a moment about reporting. So you witness a boundary violation or you witness what seems to be evidence of abuse. What does that look like? What does evidence of abuse look like? It can look like a lot of different things. And so you will have to use your judgment, but you are a mandated reporter, which means that if you see some of these signs and you're really suspecting something and you say nothing, but you had reason to believe there was abuse happening, you can be held responsible for that legally, for not protecting that child. Anyone who volunteers with minors in a church in an official capacity, like being a church school leader or a youth group advisor in the state of Illinois, is a mandated reporter. So things that you might see: unexplained injuries, burns, bites, bruises, broken bones, fading bruises or noticeable marks, seeming scared, anxious, depressed, withdrawn, or aggressive. And often we're looking at changes in behavior. So we might have a child who is, typically a little bit anxious. That doesn't mean they're being abused. But if we have a child who was always gregarious and is suddenly withdrawn and anxious, what has happened here? That might be something. Shrinks at the approach of adults, shows changes in eating and sleeping habits, reports nightmares or bedwetting. Remember that, children have nightmares and children wet the bed. But if we see sudden changes in behavior, these are the kinds of changes you are likely not to witness, but good to know. Sudden change in appetite, bizarre, sophisticated, or unusual sexual knowledge or behavior, attaches very quickly to strangers or new adults in the environment, shows extremes in behavior, such as being overly compliant or demanding or extremely passive or extremely aggressive, is either inappropriately adult or inappropriately infantile, shows signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. So none of these are, if they do this, then it's definitely abuse. But these are important things to look for and consider if you're seeing them, because you may have the opportunity to protect a child. And then if the minor reports abuse to you and says, someone is hurting me, then that should be reported. Sometimes the question comes up, what if I don't believe them? You are a mandated reporter. It is your job to believe them. If you don't believe them and you don't report it, and it turns out they were being abused and they told you and you did nothing, you are legally responsible for that. So It is your job to believe them. It's very important that you believe a child who tells you they are being abused. So what do? How do you report? You can come to me. Please come to me, and I will help you. We will need to make a report, and we'll also want to have documentation at the church. So come to me or come to Alicia if you're working with the youth group. I will ask you, would you like to make the reporting call, or would you like me to make the call and we can do it together? Remember that your duty is to report and not to investigate. You don't need to investigate any further. You may not investigate any further. If they say my uncle is hurting me, you do not go talk to that uncle. You do not go talk to the parents. You do not go talk to anyone else. We report that because you can put the child in greater danger if the abuser is confronted. Now, if the abuser is confronted by the police after an official investigation, that's a different story. That could save the child's life. But you going to the uncle, you could endanger the child's life. It's important to remember that. You will not be held accountable for reporting a claim of abuse that turns out to be false if the report was given in good faith. So you were seeing consistent bruising, and you were hearing stories of nightmares, and there seemed to be a big shift in behavior, and you just felt like in your gut, this is just not right. And you reported, and an investigation happens, and it turns out, no, that wasn't the case. You are not going to be in trouble. You're not going to be in trouble for that. You gave a report in good faith. You did it because you wanted to protect a child. You're not in trouble. What happens if a child does disclose to you someone's hurting them? How does that conversation go? Often the first thing they'll say is, can you keep a secret, or can I tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell anyone else. And you want to respond with something like, before you tell me your secret, or before you tell me this thing, know that if you tell me that someone's hurting you, or you're hurting yourself or others, I'm going to have to get help. I won't tell everyone, but I'm going to have to tell someone who can help us. So this is a good practice to get into when a child asks you to keep a secret. Maybe they say, can you keep a secret? And you say, before you tell me your secret, know that if you tell me someone's hurting you, or you're hurting yourself or someone else, that I'm going to have to get help. And then they tell you that they saw their birthday present in the closet and they know what they're getting for their birthday. That's okay. The only thing that has happened there is they know you're a safe person. And if they're ever in a rough spot, they know you're one of their people that they can come to and you'll help. You may worry if a child comes to you and you think it's going to be a disclosure of abuse, that if you say that you're going to have to get help, that they're going to not tell you. But at this point, once they get to, can I tell you something, and you can't tell anyone, they've chosen you. You're their person. They've decided that you're their safe person that they're going to tell, and nothing's going to stop them at that point. They have built up the courage to tell you, and that's taken a lot, and they're ready. So don't worry. Telling them beforehand is building trust, not breaking it down. I will say I have had a child beg me not to report it. And they still told me anyway, even though they begged. So just know that. Know they're going to tell you. And if they beg you not to report it, it's okay. And what I said to that child was, I I hear you, and I am so sorry. I understand. I have to report this, but I will explain what you have just told me about why you didn't want it reported. And I did. When I made the call, I told, this is, the child said to me, please don't report it. This is why. And that was just information for them to have. Okay, so goals after a disclosure. Our goal is to protect the victim. The order of these matters. The first thing we do is protect the victim. So if a child comes to you and says, you know, someone is hurting me every night when I get home, your goal is to protect them. You are going to say, let's make a plan to keep you safe. And you're going to come to me and we're going to figure out how to not send that child back into that abuse tonight. That is our number one goal. Also, a part of protecting the victim is not going to the abuser and saying, this child just told me you're hurting them. That puts the child at risk. The number two goal is stopping the abuser. We are not the ones who do that. This is the result of usually legal intervention, definitely different choices and therapy and all kinds of things for that abuser. We don't have control over whether or not that happens. And then healing. Healing is our last step. We're not going to start there. We're going to start with protecting the victim, keeping them safe, and eventually we will get to helping them heal. This number is in your Safe Church policy. It's here. It's not our direct line for Illinois, but it is a line that will direct you to the right place. So if you are needing to call and you can't remember the number, or you can't find the number for Illinois, you can call 1-800-25-ABUSE and they'll direct you. Okay, now we've come to our emergency procedures. Let's say there's a lockdown. What do we do? First of all, how will you know there's a lockdown? We don't have a PA system like a school. We won't have anyone coming over a loudspeaker telling you that we're locked down. But a trusted voice, probably a staff person, will just say, lockdown, lockdown. And you'll want to clear the hallways, anywhere that can't be secured, restrooms, anything. Wherever people are that can't be secured, get them out of there. And wherever you are, in the room you are, lock the door, cover the windows, cover everything you can, and move everyone away from windows and doors. So hide, take attendance, see who's with you. Do you have extra people? And then wait for an all clear from a voice that you know. Don't take an all clear from a voice that you don't know. Stay in place. Don't answer the door. Don't respond to alarms. Just listen for that all clear. I hope we never need this. I hope you never need this procedure. But this is what we would do in case we needed to. Okay, what if we need to evacuate? Let's say the fire alarm goes off. You gotta get out. You're gonna put 1 leader at the front and 1 leader at the back. And you're gonna have all of the minors in your care in between the two of you. And you're gonna head for the nearest stairwell or the nearest exit and get out of the building. And then you're gonna head for the corner of Kenilworth and Ontario. Once you get there, take attendance, note if you are missing anyone or if you have someone extra so that we can account for everyone who should have been there. Allergies. We have a new section of our Safe Church policy that addresses allergies. We do have some severe allergies among the children of First United. We have a severe airborne allergy, so we are being very mindful. All of our public spaces are going to be nut-free zones now. All public spaces. So the sanctuary, the chapel, the lounge, Centennial Hall, and the kitchen, in addition to the classrooms, which were already nut-free zones. So all snacks provided will be nut-free and free of all allergens listed for the registrants for that class. We do have some allergies that are not nuts. So we're going to be nut-free, but we're also going to be mindful of the particular allergies in our class. So please, 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 if you have brought nuts, keep them secured. They don't come out. If you need to eat your, peanut butter sandwich, you can eat it in my office, but you cannot eat it in the lounge. You cannot eat it in your classroom. You cannot eat it out and about. Those airborne allergies are very serious. All right, we have made it. Remember that nothing is more important than the physical, mental, and emotional safety of those in your care. There's no convenience, there's no enjoyment, there's no learning outcome. It's just not worth it. So reflect back on what you learned today. What did you hear that you already knew? What did you see from a different angle? What did you learn that was new? Filled in a gap? What new direction will you go? And what action will you take? Just take a moment to reflect. We want to make sure that you absorb and integrate all of this information so that you can support the children in your care. So when you see me next, please give me the back page of your Safe Church policy signed, which states that you have read it and you understand. And now that you have done all of that, we will commission you. And we commission you because there is nothing more important. This is incredibly sacred and holy work that you are going to do, and it deserves commissioning. So siblings in faith, after spiritual and educational preparation today, it is time to send you forth to do the work of protecting the vulnerable of First United Church of Oak Park. If you are ready to commit to this work, please respond to the following questions with "I will" with holy support. Will you use your unique gifts to practice and share what you have learned today? Will you practice and model healthy boundaries in your personal life and in your work at First United? Will you make the physical, emotional, and spiritual safety of the most vulnerable among us your charge and your first priority? In Jesus' name, you are sent forth with good news that will make First United a place of healing and welcome for all people. Thanks be to God. Amen.